in the coop smoking cat piss. All right. This always feels so weird starting. On May 17th, 2018, Mac Miller was at a bar. He was out with friends, knocking back a few drinks. To him, it may have seemed like just another day, but to the public, Mac at a bar was odd. A year earlier, he would not have been there. A year earlier, things were different. Back then, he was in a good place. He was dating one of our most famous singers in the world, Ariana Grande, and he was happy. The Divine Feminine, his fourth album, released in the fall of 2016, had been well received, and he had just performed at Coachella, a career highlight. Most importantly, though, after years of substance abuse, the part of his life was behind him. It's amazing, he said. I'm actually completely sober for the first time. This was a revelation. For much of his career, it seemed he had been under the influence of one substance or another, but he always appeared to have things under control. He did drugs, a longtime fan who got to know him socially told me. But it wasn't an addiction, it was more of a lifestyle. The lifestyle had brought him tremendous success. At the time, he had released 4 studio albums, numerous mixtapes, countless collaborations, earning him worldwide fame, millions of dollars, and a legion of die-hard fans. He had started independently with Rostrum Records, then moved to a major label, Warner Brothers, inking a $10 million deal. But success hadn't come easy. Hailing from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he was a white rapper in a traditionally black genre. Respect wasn't given, it had to be earned, and it took work. Years of pounding the pavement, years of nonstop touring, and years of releasing music, all in a quest to be taken seriously. When he finally achieved... Sorry, my throat got itchy. When he finally achieved a modicum of respectability... I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but fuck it. Arguably around 2013, after the release of his second album, he struggled to adapt. Damn. I'm not saying I'm Mac Miller, but some of this shit's kind of resonating. Being famous used to just defeat me, he said. I wouldn't leave my house because I was worried about someone being like, oh, are you Mac Miller? And then the rest of the night, I couldn't be myself. If he was uncomfortable with fame, dating Ariana, a paparazzi magnet, was unlikely to have helped. A former Nickelodeon star, she'd parlayed her TV fame into pop music career, notching multiple hits along the way. Like Mac, she had passionate fan base who obsessed over her every move. I knew it. Yo. Yeah. I'm on stream, though.
You got it child-proof.
I do have it child-proof. Sorry, chat. We'll give Brandon a pass. I actually like Brandon. I'm just kidding. No one read into that. You guys are going to be silly about it. You all know what I'm trying to say. Where are we at? Like Mac, she had a passionate fan base who obsessed over her every move. Their fans seemed generally supportive of their relationship, though, and the pair kept up appearances. They performed at each other's shows, were spotted on each other's social media accounts, and showed up at events. For a year and a half, things seemed to be good until, well, they weren't. On May 9th, 2018, the celebrity industrial complex was shaken up when Ariana announced via Instagram story that she and Mac had broken up. For his part, Mac remained mum, offering no public comments, but within days, Ariana was rumored to move on, dating SNL comedian Pete Davidson. By the time the 17th had rolled around, the day Mac sat at the bar, a week had gone by, a week in which gossip columns went crazy speculating about Ariana and Pete's new relationship. With the budding couple doing little to dispel the rumors, instead, they simply stirred the pot, flirting their way through their generation the way their generation did best. By liking each other's old photos on Instagram and posting pics of their matching tattoos. Had Max seen this? It was difficult to tell, though he was an extremely online person, active on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, even Vine. I don't think Vine was around in 2018, but we'll let it go. When it was popping, oh, fuck. He was also prone to reading negative comments about himself online, which affected him deeply. Then again, it was also possible he hadn't seen it at all. Regardless, Mac was at the bar downing drinks. It is not clear what he drank, maybe Knob Creek, Jameson, Remy Martin, or Hennessy, all brands he was fond of. It is possible, based on information revealed later, that he had more in his system than alcohol. But as the night grew darker and the spring cold came in, as it does in LA, where the wind bites at the skin when it rolls over the Pacific, it was time to roll. The bar was not far from his house. He would later tell his longtime DJ Clockwork, that he was mad close. So close, in fact, that he saw no problem with leaving that bar with his car keys in hand and putting those keys into the ignition of a 2014 Mercedes G63 AMG, the G-Wagon, as it's colossally known, and doing something they tell you not to do when you've been drinking, let alone drinking the way Mac was known to drink. He got into the car with 2 passengers and tried to drive his drunk ass home. Around 1 a.m., he got closer to his house. He rounded a bend. Maybe we will crown the first chapter. He rounded a bend. He had come around this bend countless times before, but this time things were different. Something just told me to floor it, he said. He pressed his foot down on the gas. All 8 cylinders fired 540 horsepower of German steel booming around the corner. 0 to 60 in 5 seconds. 4 seconds, 3 seconds, 2 seconds. Boom, into the curb. Mac crashed, the car spinning onto the other side of the road, up over the opposite curve, right into the telephone pole. The telephone pole then cracked, collapsing in a heap against some trees. Mac Miller opened the driver's side door of the G-Wagon, and out into the darkness he went. Through a fence, he dashed, escaping only to be arrested at his house hours later, charged with driving under the influence and a hit and run. After posting $15,000 bail, he was released the next day. The rapper Bun B, a friend and a mentor, called him after the accident became headline news. "I'm all right, Unc," Max said. "It was just a rough day." "If you need to talk to somebody about what's going on, Bun said. "Nah, OG, I promise I'm good," Max said. Bun took him at his word. So did other people who spoke to him. At that point, there really wasn't much more that you can do, Bun said. I know that this was a concentrated effort to help him fight his demons, trying to help him deal with what he was dealing with. And when people are fighting addiction, it's always easy to put on the public face like, nah, man, I'm good. I'm working on it. I'm addressing it. You can say everything that you want for people to hear. You think it will stop them from asking you about it, and then go right back to whatever it is that you told them that you weren't doing. The crash seemed out of character, though. Perhaps it was a sign. Just over a week after the crash, while still at work on that album that had just become Swimming, he would sit in the backyard of his house in Brentwood, staring out at the mountains, the great big sky above, and the rows of houses built. On most mornings, the scene brought him great tranquility. "Bro, what happened?" Clockwork asked him. "What happened with that accident?" Max sucked on a cigarette. He looked away, failing to make eye contact. "I don't know why I did it," he said. "I don't know what the fuck I was thinking." He took another drag. "Luckily, we hit that tree, and the tree stopped us from going down the hill." He bounced his knee against his hand. He seemed nervous now, hitting the cigarette harder and faster. "I don't know, man." Then there was a pause. Something said without saying it. Mac looked out further. "You ever feel invincible?" he said. More silence. "I just feel invincible." Okay, so that was the prologue. I'm keen to read more. I didn't notice. All right. In Point Breeze, Pittsburgh, the leafy streets are clean, the air quiet and peaceful. Stately homes dot neat, well-manicured blocks. The most visible hardship here, you'd think, is the never-ending saga of maintaining one's lawn. The neighborhood is filled with children and dogs. One resident told me everyone wants to live in Point Breeze. Some of the wealthiest people in history of the United States lived there, said Arthur Pitt, a Point Breeze native who, depending on whom you're talking to, can lay to having been one of the ones to discover Mac Miller. It fluctuates from the wealthier side. If you cross the main avenue, it's not as wealthy. It's a mix. Point Breeze is an interesting place. Indeed, it is. Long before Pulitzer Prize winning actor Annie Dillard's memoir about Point Breeze, An American Childhood, published in 1987, detailing her coming of age in the Pittsburgh suburb in the 1950s, wrestling with their neighborhood's complicated legacy, and long before doctors, lawyers, and politicians, today's upper middle class called it home. Point Breeze was just a bunch of trees in the midst of great unsettled wilderness. Historians trace it post-Native American history to 1758, when it was settled by Europeans. Back then, the neighborhood was neither breezy nor pointy. But there was a hotel, the Point Breeze Hotel, that stood at the center of present-day 5th and Penn Avenue. Some 100 years ago, a traveler from a distant land, perhaps New York or Philadelphia, might have been riding along in their pimped-out stagecoach. They'd be tired. A trip west could take literally months, so they'd stop, have a hearty meal, catch some Z's, 2218, then wake to the sound of birdsong in the morning before continuing on their journey. In those days, the only way Point Breeze was the Greensburg Pike, a Native American trail paved in the early 19th century. At once a rustic and remote, it wasn't long after it got paved that Pittsburgh gentry discovered the area. They saw it as a refuge from the hustle and bustle of the city rapidly growing around it. Among the esteemed folks who landed in Point Breeze was Judge William Wilkins, the son of a captain in the American Revolution. Wilkins had many positions of high social importance. He was the president of the Bank of Pittsburgh, a member of the House of Representatives, a senator, a congressman, a secretary of war, even the U.S. minister to Russia. In his day, he was kind of a big deal. Wilkins liked Point Breeze, and in 1835, he built himself a grand MTV crib-style house there. This would be a mansion, a big sprawling thing fashioned in great revival style, with 4 Georgian columns fronting a stately entrance. Surrounded by 650 acres of open land, a house such as this would not do with just an address. It needed to be more than that, for it was more than that. It was a big home surrounded by woods. Wilkins dubbed it Homewood. At Homewood, Wilkins hosted important people, Daniel Webster, Henry Clay, and even the 7th Vice President of the United States, John Calhoun. I thought it was Coulihan, I'm sorry. John Calhoun. All came by the mansion to eat and chit-chat. Politics as usual. All the while, the world outside Homewood, outside of Point Breeze, was rapidly changing. America was a young century and Pittsburgh was a young city. But it was already proving to be one of the most important locations in the Union. Pittsburgh sat at the confluence of the Allegheny and Monongahela rivers, again with these names, which met and became at the Ohio River. All right, well, we could have just said that. Then flowed 981 miles southwest to Cara, Illinois, where it connected with the Mississippi. In the early 1800s, the big businesses in Pittsburgh was boats, because railroads were still in their infancy, and traveling on rivers was how people got around. To wit, it was from Pittsburgh, not St. Louis, and commonly thought that Lewis and Clark departed on their landmark 8,000-mile expedition, exploring the territories obtained by the United States from France and the Louisiana Purchase. The legendary explorers floated down the Ohio River to Missouri, and from there they went on to discover the rest of the country. Because of this, Pittsburgh in the 1800s was known as the gateway to the West. All of America was soon head in that direction, through Pittsburgh as they would get there. But Pittsburgh also had other things working in its favor, like a wealth of natural resources. In the late 1700s, for example, large coal deposits were discovered a few miles west of Point Breeze across the Ohio River, in a neighborhood largely settled by German immigrants called Mount Washington. Coal had many uses and led to the development of a variety of industries. It could be used for fuel, and with fuel, there was a world of opportunity all around the city. Factories and foundries were being built. Iron, brass, tin, glass, textiles, furniture, booze, even oil refining, it could be made. Pittsburgh would make it. Along with the boom in industry came a boom in population. Immigrants arrived, Welsh, Scottish, German, Irish, and others. Many of them would work in the factories, while the veterans of the Revolutionary War were literally handed plots of land. As for black people, the year 1780 saw as enslavement, and this was abolished in Pennsylvania through it remained in another form. Indentured servitude, which held back former enslaved people and children of enslaved people from taking it in the great Pittsburgh land part grabbed. Perhaps the most famous of the Pittsburgh strivers was Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was born in Scotland, but early in his life, after his parents had fallen on hard times, they borrowed money and in 1848 with Andrew to Pennsylvania. They took up residence in Slabtown, a noisy, overcrowded immigrant community that came with only the finest accoutrements. No natural gas, no water, no streets, that remained cloaked in the darkness at night, and where at all times of the day one would encounter wild hogs, and dogs roaming free. Sorry, my mouth got a little dry there. There was also a little concern for the conditions the factories created. The smoke fermented and penetrated everything, Carnegie wrote. If you washed your face and hands, they were as dirty as ever in an hour. The soot gathered in the hair and irritated the skin, and for time, life was more or less miserable. Carnegie Hall. Sorry if I'm messing some of these names and words up. I'm not the best reader. Carnegie was not overly educated, having ended his studies around the time he immigrated, but was industrious and hardworking. As a youth, he worked in a cotton factory and then got a job as a messenger. It was through this job that he met Thomas A. Scott, president of Pennsylvania Railroad, who took him on as secretary, paying him $35 a month. It was, $35 a month? God damn. It was at this job, now with more money, that he began investing, taking up interest in coal, iron, and oil. When the Civil War broke out, demand increased for iron, helping Carnegie turn his profits. When the war finally ended, he turned his interest to iron almost exclusively, resigning from the Pennsylvania Railroad to start the Keystone Bridge Company in 1865, making a small fortune in contracts to build iron bridges in place of the more common wooden ones. But by then, Carnegie had already moved up in the world, living with his family, far from the grime and pollution that hung like a thick cloud over the city, in a house on Homewood Street, just a stone throws away from Judge William Wilkins, which he purchased in 1862. When are we going to start talking about Mac Miller? What the fuck is going on? In his early 30s, having made enough money to no longer be poor, but still lacking in some sense the luxuries that wealth could afford, Carnegie wrote himself a memo. During his lifetime, it could never be shared, and it was only after his death, when his wife donated it to the New York Public Library, that it became public. The memo detailed Carnegie's plans to retire at 35. At that point, he would aim to become a learned, sophisticated man, and by 40, his mind flush with all the literary knowledge he had since then consumed. He'd move in his newly cosmopolitan life to London. He thought and devoted himself to the more serious matters. Maybe he'd run a newspaper, all the while putting his money to good use, helping those who were less fortunate. To continue much longer overwhelmed by business cares and with the most of my thoughts wholly upon the way to make more money in the shortest time must degrade me beyond hope of permanent recovery, he wrote. The pursuit of money, it seemed, wasn't all what it was cracked up to be. But early retirement never came. A few years later, Carnegie began turning iron into steel, which in turn led him to buy up the steel mills. In the late 1800s, he formed Carnegie Steel Company. In 1901, he sold it in behest of J.P. Morgan. Oh, that's interesting. So the U.S. Steel, you're an asshole for fucking giving me a notification there, netting him $226 million, an amount worth more than $7 billion today. Wow, that's a lot of money. It's a lot more than like $35 a month. Among Carnegie's partners in the steel business was Henry Clay Frick, whose acquaintance he made while Frick was honeymooning his wife in New York. Despite a 25-year difference in age, Jesus Christ, the two became fast friends. Frick, too, was an industrialist, but his main trade was coke. Not the white stuff, but what became of baking coal in a brick beehive oven, and which was a key component in the manufactures of steel. According to R.J. Gangawar, the editor of Carnegie's magazines, Frick adroitly took control of the coal fields of Connersville in the 1870s and expanded his control of mining and cooking operations until he became a millionaire by the age of 30. The finest metallurgical, man, I really got to learn more words, coke in the world was his to sell, and he sold it to Carnegie Steel, which eventually became a partner in that firm, as well as remaining the name King of Coke. At Carnegie Steel, Frick rose to become chief executive, all the while serving in a kind of Tom Hagen role to Don Andrew. But over time, after fortunes were made, many times over, the two had a falling out. Carnegie tried forcing Frick from the company, so Frick raised the price of his Coke. I feel like we're talking about drugs here. Carnegie balked and fired him. In turn, Frick tried kicking Carnegie's ass. Instead, he had to settle for a good old-fashioned lawsuit. Said to be, at the time, at least the largest in American history, Frick won the lawsuit and pocketed $31 million. The two men would remain bitter enemies for the rest of their lives, excuse me, though they continued to be neighbors, as Frick, too, called Point Breeze his home. From 1882 to 1905, he lived alongside his family in a 25-room mansion called the Clayton, which he purchased for $45,000. And he received visitors, among them the titans of industry, politicians, and other members of the upper crust. In fact, in 1902, as part of his executive committee looking to bring the president to Pittsburgh, Henry Clay Frick sent an invite to Theodore Roosevelt. Roosevelt accepted and soon traveled to the city, where he gave a speech at Schenley Park to a crowd of more than 750,000 people. Afterward, in lieu of returning to Washington, he departed for the Claytons, where he dined with the Fricks, such was the appeal of the Frick's home, and such was the allure of Point Breeze, residents walked its streets. When Frick died nearly 20 years later, he left much of his wealth to be used for the public good, including the home and that land that would become Frick Park, the largest municipal park in all of Pittsburgh. As the 20th century progressed, the robber barons who made their mark in Pittsburgh would leave for elsewhere, like New York City, and before long, the era of great wealth they'd brought to American life would decline. The mansions that for 100 years once stood in Point Breeze would be in many instances demolished. The streets would be built up and expanded. I looked at chat for 1 second. I see, oh, frick this. Now I lost where I'm at. It would be expanded as the neighborhoods around it, the East Liberty, Squirrel Hill, and Shady Side grew. But the legacy of achievement would forever remain in Point Breeze, and the decades after Frick and Carnegie were long gone, and the years when Judge William Wilkins' last name would be known only to historians, the people in Point Breeze would unknowingly walk in their image. In a city where the cost of living was, compared to the rest of the United States, relatively low, the neighborhood would remain, unlike much of Pittsburgh proper, affluent and aspirational. In Point Breeze, politicians, artists, and educators, scientists, doctors, and even lawyers, the best and the brightest, came to live. The Steel City would boom and bust as it so famously did throughout the second half of the 1900s. But in Point Breeze, a dependable upper middle class life known as the American dream was obtainable. And that was the world into which decades later one young boy was born. Okay. I'm starting to get a little sloppy on the reading. when I see like big words, I get nervous and then I start stuttering and then I don't know what to do. You know? It's a photographer. I don't know why I said Karen like that. Was a photographer by trade. One of her clients was University of Pittsburgh Medical Center. And when the hospital needed a face for one of its billboards, we need a cute kid, they said. Malcolm said his mother thought, well, I've got one right here. And that's how, at the age of 5, not even yet able to tie his own shoes, Malcolm McCormick, Trueberg face ended up on a billboard. He had a thermometer in his mouth, Karen said in an interview with Complex. All of his friends that were in preschool would see it because it was on the highway coming back from the airport. And they'd say, is Malcolm sick? The house he grew up in Point Breeze, there we go, was full of art and music. Karen's photography work kept her busy, and his dad, Mark, was an architect. He served on the city's art commission and ran his own firm, which was prominent in the redevelopment of many landmarks in and around Pittsburgh. But Mark was not a Pittsburgh native. In fact, he had grown up in Silver Lake, Ohio, an affiliate suburb of Akron. It looked like Akon. I don't know. I don't think there's a suburb named Akron. In the early 70s, he graduated from Miami University of Ohio with a dual degree in psychology and philosophy. After some years working as a carpenter in Denver, Colorado, he found his way back to the school and graduated with a master's degree in architecture. In 1979, in Denver, Mark quickly found employment when the firm Barker Rinker Seacat and Partners, figure that name out. In 1984, he became a partner, but it wasn't long before then he was on the move again. But this time to Pennsylvania. By then, he had met Karen, who had grown up in Pittsburgh, and in 1986, they were married. Karen's father was an engineer, her mother a homemaker, and she went to school in Massachusetts, Boston University, and Emerson College specifically, where she studied English and art history. Public records reveal that 2 years after getting married, with Mark working as the city architect of Pittsburgh, they bought a house in Point Breeze on Rosemary Road. Built in 1855, the 4-bedroom house was a shade under 2,500 square feet, not overly large, but perhaps just the right size, because not long afterward, in 1988, Karen gave birth. The family's first son, named Miller, perhaps for the maternal grandmother, Marcia, who was born Marcia Miller, before changing her last name to that of her first husband, William Ted Myers. The last name Karen appears to have taken and kept upon marrying Mark, and later Weiss for her second husband, Mickey Weiss. In the early 90s, the McCormicks were a prosperous bunch. Mark had by then left his city job and gone back into the private sector, buying out his previous employer, Oliver Design Group, when Malcolm arrived in 1992. One of Mark's big projects was redesigning the Heinz 57 Center. And a historic, why do you say, wait, chat, hold on. Tell me if this is grammatically correct. It says an historic building. Would it not be a historic building? Or am I crazy? Your fucking horses don't stop. They keep going. It's midnight. Happy Wednesday. Not yet for me. I pre-fired it. An historic building formerly housing Gimbel's flagship department store. Rechristened under the corporate banner of German ketchup entrepreneur and one-time Point Breeze resident Henry J. Heinz. I didn't know that. That's cool. Yo, what's up with Point Breeze? They're just like popping people out that are just like hella relevant or what? For the most part, Malcolm, why didn't we talk about that? Why didn't we talk about like the guy that created like one of the world's most known ketchup brands came from Point Breeze? Why did we talk about these other fucking assholes? Way more interested in the guy that created sauce, ketchup. You know what I'm saying? This feels very relevant too. We were talking about this last night. For those of you that weren't here, go back and watch the VOD. Thank you. For the most part, Malcolm's childhood was idyllic. I'm going to try on that one. In 1998, the family moved a few blocks to a new house, which was larger, 5 bedrooms. Things were going well. A few years earlier, Mark had completed a big project. The redevelopment of the public library in Mount Lebanon, a Pittsburgh suburb. The work was significant. It involved stripping the library's original structure, built in 1965, to its bones, then building it back up again, making it bigger, more than doubling it from the 13,000 square feet to 26,500 square feet, and filling it with natural light. Ample space was dedicated for reading and individual study. We love the light, Cynthia Ritchie, the library's director, said. At the time, the building is spacious, but there are nooks for reading. I also like the pitched and beamed roof. This is nirvana for us. Another big design plus was rooms for computers, 62 of them, without sacrificing space for books and library stacks. In fact, now there was even more room for books. We still have books, Ritchie said. Libraries call them the cockroaches of civilization. You can't get rid of them. I don't think they will ever disappear. Upon its completion, the former commissioner of Mount Lebanon, Barbara Logan, said of Mark's firm, "You have won much-deserved recognition, and a standard of quality has been established for this community." The project netted Mark a Design Excellence Award from the Pittsburgh chapter of the American Institute of Architects. One more sip. Mark and Karen didn't necessarily push their children to be creative, but it wasn't a stretch that they would be. "I'm a photographer and my husband's an architect," Karen told Complex. "There's a lot of genetic disposition towards creativity." Karen and Mark were baby boomers, part of the post-hippie generation that defined so much of American life in the second half of the 20th century. Music, art, and culture, they were into it all. When the kids were young, they took them to jazz concerts in the park. At home, they hipped the boys to the music of their youth and anything else that caught their ears. "My dad plays guitar," Malcolm said, "and my mom always had music blasting in the house. All kinds of music, everything from Talking Heads to Lauryn Hill to Aretha Franklin, crazy stuff. So I was like instantly into music." Malcolm was particularly keen on the Beatles, whose album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, would over time become one of his favorites. Malcolm loved the band so much that he got 2 Beatles tattoos, John Lennon on his right forearm and the word Imagine on his right inner bicep. "I love what the Beatles represent," Malcolm would say many years after the band's music had been seared into his memory. "I loved all the shit when they started getting really weird. I kind of identify with them, not in massiveness, but in their journey." As for Lennon and that tattoo, he flat out believed the man from Liverpool was the second coming of the Messiah. "He's Jesus," he said. "John Lennon is my favorite." Then there was Dylan. His dad loved Bob Dylan so much that he brought their boys to see Dylan on his never-ending tour when Malcolm was still a child. The family tickets were general admission, but Malcolm was so entranced by the performance that he snuck down to the front row where he could take it all in. And back at the house, it wasn't uncommon to find Mark hanging out with the kids, guitar on his hip, singing and strumming one of Dylan's tunes. "It all helped me see that you didn't need a whole lot of things to make an impact," Malcolm said. "Sometimes you just need a guy and a guitar speaking his own truths." But it was more than Dylan and his truth that affected Malcolm. It was Dylan's voice. That nasal mid-range drone, whether he was belting out his material or singing low and controlled, if Dylan's music was playing, you could tell it was him. Dylan's voice was as much as a part of his act as the guitar or the harmonica. "Bob Dylan is someone who had a voice that was unlike anyone else's," Malcolm said. "He wasn't hitting the wildest falsetto runs. He just put his soul into it." Years later, Malcolm would seek to emulate this. "When I sing, it's a very vulnerable state," he said, "very raw. It's me not worrying about where I fall on the spectrum of good singing and more like how my voice is my instrument. But that was yet to come. Still a kid, Malcolm exuded a natural charisma. In home videos and photos, friends aren't just embraced, they're hugged as if life depends on it. Many people who knew Malcolm as a child say that he radiated happiness. Take one particular video where he raps the lyrics to the Sugar Hill Gang's Rapper's Delight. I've seen that video. He delivers the lyrics. I think I've seen that video. He delivers the lyrics with a wry smile, his eyes wide and teeth big, hair falling just above his ears. In her interview with Complex, Karen recalled that Malcolm had always been magnetic, relishing any opportunity to put on a show. Dylan Reynolds met Malcolm when he was 5 at a Little League game. Malcolm's face was painted like Spider-Man, and he was surrounded by other kids. Even then, he was the center of attention. The pair became best friends and were soon sleeping over at each other's houses regularly. In an article for netspittsburgh.com, Reynolds remembered a particular moment back when they played youth football together. Our coach told us that on defense, we should all try to touch the ball carrier. This was supposed to teach us how to be involved in a play and follow through until the play was over. Malcolm, who was the littlest guy on the field, took this literally and would often be the last one to jump on the dog pile, to which the announcer would say, "Mac attack." He always wanted to be involved in the action. He hated to be left out. It's very funny too, because I'm gonna be honest. I was really, we talked about this. I was really small growing up, and I definitely, like, when I first started playing football, all the kids were a lot bigger than me, and I was always so scared to get trapped under there because I was so small. That's really cool that, like, he kind of had a similar experience. Mac attack. That's funny. Other friends who played youth sports remembered him spending more time messing around than actually playing the games. I used to put rocks in my pockets when I played baseball. For Malcolm, the real action wasn't on the field. It was off of it. You have those guys in the dugout that are making everyone laugh and are always grabbing people's attention. People taking people's attention away from the game, said Ben Cohen, who played with Malcolm in a baseball league in a nearby Squirrel Hill, the neighborhood famous for being the home of Mr. Rogers. He was a good athlete, but a better entertainer. Malcolm was interested in music as soon as he was old enough to recognize it. He was always dancing around the house. If it had a beat, he'd move to it. Then, around the age of 5 or 6 years old, things got turned up a notch. It was the holiday season, and he really wasn't looking forward to another pair of socks. He told his parents that he wanted to make music, like, for real. So that year, on one of the Hanukkah 8 nights, he unwrapped a gift and found something life-altering staring back at him, a brand new keyboard. I hooked that thing up and never stopped playing it, he said. Next came piano lessons. Malcolm took to it. Still, he had to add his own twist. At piano recitals, I would never play Beethoven or Mozart. I would play my own shit, he said, which wasn't as good as Beethoven or Mozart, but you have to respect the effort. Then there was that bellwether of every child's upbringing, religion. Mom was Jewish and dad was Catholic. For Malcolm, like many kids of interfaith marriages, this complicated things. His sense of identity was in flux and was shaped by the world around him. Early on, he attended Catholic schools. First, it was elementary at St. Peter and Paul. Bro, what the fuck, dude? Did not accept people with ADHD. They did not allow that. They would, like, deny the fact that I had ADHD. So they would put me in, when I would have my moments, they would put me in a corner in a dark room. I'm not even fucking around. I honestly forgot about a lot of this shit. Trauma. And I remember I told my mom one time, and she came no, it wasn't. I don't think I told my mom. I think I got in trouble. My mom came to school and saw where they had me, and she was like, "Oh, fuck no." And she took me out. So, but I was getting called. My mom was getting called almost every day. She can attest to this too. I don't remember what the school is called. Oh, I do. It was called St. Elizabeth's. Damn. Fucking crazy. All right. Lock back in. After that, middle school at St. Betty, I don't know if it's Betty or Bede or Bede, where the philosophy espoused, it's that each child is a unique human being endowed by God with special gifts, and where learnings are prepared are peppered with Roman Catholic influences with a focus on faith, family, community, love, and services. The goal in the end was to model Christ-like behaviors through actions and words. But Malcolm also went to Hebrew school. At 13, he had this bat mitzvah at Rodif Shalom, and historic synagogue. I know that word, but I don't think I've ever actually seen it on paper. It's happening again. An historic. An historic. Like, what the fuck? Like, who's a historic synagogue with the distinguished privilege of being the oldest Jewish congregation in Western Pennsylvania. And he spent many summers at the Emma Kaufman Camp, a Jewish sleepaway camp near Morgantown, West Virginia, where at night he slept in a dorm and during the day he engaged in summery activities, barn fires and sing-alongs, swimming, water skiing, canoeing, horseback riding, and arts and crafts. It was your typical summer jam. Malcolm made many close friends at the camp and was influenced by his outings, daily trips where the kids boarded a yellow school bus, then traveled to places like Cincinnati and Washington, D.C. It was a way to break up the monotony of the days spent in the great outdoors. But it's also provided an opportunity for Malcolm to entertain his pals. Like in a video taken when Malcolm was a teenager where he sits on the bus with his friends, dressed in togas, their fitted caps twisted backwards. The scene has all gravitas jar of dirt, of a frat house. This has got to be bullshit, right? This has got to be fucking bullshit. The Toga Squad 5 homie, Malcolm shouts. And the kids start shouting back, Toga, Toga, Toga. Then he quiets them down. Do the beat. Sitting across from Malcolm, a kid begins beatboxing. Like a comic version of 8 Mile, Malcolm smiles, his braces tight against his big white teeth. He pushes his medium-length hair back, fixes the blue toga resting against his white tank top. His eyes wide, he jumps in, on the bus sitting here in a toga. The rhyme is otherwise inoffensive, just a kid saying things to impress his friends on a hot summer day. It is hardly the stuff from which deep meaning could be extracted. Through the lyric, I spit a few lines and they act like it's a crime. Suggests something unspoken at play. Malcolm attended the Emma Kaufman camp until he was 15 on weekends. He'd perform at the camp's Shabbat talent shows. The camp's Shabbat talent shows. People say he got his start at a Shabbat concert. Sam Bloom, a former camp director, told the Jewish Chronicle, if it wasn't, it was darn close to where it began. He did more than rap at these concerts. Jeremy Goldman, another former camp director, told the Chronicle that he remembered telling Malcolm his favorite song was Send Me On My Way by Rusted Root. And when Saturday night came around, sure enough, there was Malcolm with his guitar, belting out the song. At 13 years old, he was cooler than anyone I had ever met. And I was 31 at the time, Goldman said. Whenever it was his turn to do his act, he brought the house down. But Malcolm never made much of a real fuss about Judaism or Christianity. On a song titled SDS, released in 2013, he rapped that he was a Jewish Buddhist trying to consume the views of Christianity. Damn, that's cool. More than just a clever boast, it seemed to be a summary of his spiritual life. Judaism, which he would later mine for both comedic and creative effect, was just another footnote in the countless things that made him who he was. Fans seized on his Judaism, though. In an early interview, when he told people they were calling him the greatest Jewish rapper of all time, he chuckled, I'm Jewish, that's how I was raised, I had a bat mitzvah, and said, I'm not a very religious person. So it's humorous to me when people do this big Jewish rapper thing. This is a world filled with so much variety of cultures. Every time something different is out, it's good because then it's just like, oh, a Jewish rapper. I didn't think there could be a Jewish rapper, but there could be any kind of rapper. Religion has nothing to do with that. You see, people were billing him as a Jewish rapper when he was again, what? when he was just a rapper. When he was just a rapper who happened to be Jewish. Were they confused? Perhaps, but then Malcolm wore Judaism literally on his sleeve. On his upper left arm, he had a tattoo, the Jewish symbol of chai. In Judaism, the chai is made up of two letters, Chet and Oud? Chet and Yod? I know it, but I can't remember it. I don't know if I'm saying it right. Together they are said to mean alive or living. The chai commemorates life. He got the tattoo for two reasons. He wanted it to remind him of who he was, a Jew, but also to remind one crucial thing, that in life, no moment was greater than any other to be alive, breathing. That was a beautiful thing. Life was something he hoped to never take for granted. I think we stop there. I think that was a good that was a good chapter. Yeah. I was pretty good. I feel like when I'm reading, it's very natural for me to kind of like story tell it in a way, which like I feel like you should do when you're reading a book such like this. But I guess like my enunciation on certain things, obviously the words that I fuck up, but like the way I kind of tell these stories, it's like it is really cool that I do want to do something like this. I do want to read maybe more on live. Like growing up, I remember so many times like it was so crazy kind of reading that chapter right there and talking about his childhood and going to summer camp. It just kind of made me start thinking. And then alongside reading the books, like when I was a kid, my mom would always read me, like she wouldn't read me actually.